The Vought F-8 Crusader was a single-engine, supersonic, carrier-based, air superiority jet aircraft built by Vought for the United States Navy and Marine Corps, replacing the Vought F7U Cutlass, and for the French Navy. The first F-8 prototype was ready for flight in February 1955. The F-8 served principally in the Vietnam War. The Crusader was the last American fighter with guns as the primary weapon, earning it the title, the last of the Gunfighters. The F-8 Crusader was a photo reconnaissance development and operated longer in U.S. service than any of the fighter versions. F-8s played a crucial role in the Cuban Missile Crisis, providing essential low-level photographs impossible to acquire by other means. U.S. Naval Reserve units continued to operate the F-8 until 1987. Design and development. In September 1952, the United States Navy announced a requirement for a new fighter. It was to have a top speed of Mach 1.2 at 30,000 feet with a climb rate of 25,000 feet per minute, and a landing speed of no more than 100 miles per hour. Korean War experience had demonstrated that 0.50-inch machine guns were no longer sufficient, and as the result, the new fighter was to carry a 20mm cannon. In response, the Vought team, led by John Russell Clark, created the V-383. Unusual for a fighter, the aircraft had a high-mounted wing which necessitated the use of a fuselage-mounted short and light landing gear. The Crusader was powered by a Pratt & Whitney J57 turbojet engine. The engine was equipped with an afterburner that, unlike on later engines, was either fully lit or off. The engine produced 18,000 pounds of thrust at full power, enough to allow the F-8 to climb straight up in clean configuration. The Crusader was the first jet fighter in U.S. service to reach 1,000 miles per hour. U.S. Navy pilot R.W. Windsor reached 1,015 miles per hour on a flight in 1956. The most innovative aspect of the design was the variable incidence wing, which pivoted by 7 degrees out of the fuselage on takeoff and landing. This afforded increased lift due to a greater angle of attack without compromising forward visibility because the fuselage stayed level. This innovation is credited as the most important factor that led to the F-8's development team being awarded the Collier Trophy in 1956. Simultaneously, the lift was augmented by leading-edge slats drooping by 25 degrees and inboard flaps extending to 30 degrees. The rest of the aircraft took advantage of contemporary aerodynamic innovations with area-ruled fuselage, all-moving stabilators, dog-tooth notching at the wing folds for improved yaw stability, and liberal use of titanium in the airframe. The armament, as specified by the Navy, consisted primarily of 4 20mm autocannon. The Crusader happened to be the last U.S. fighter designed with guns as its primary weapon. They were supplemented with a retractable tray with 32 unguided Mk4, Mk40 folding fin aerial rocket, and cheek pylons for 2 guided AIM-9 Sidewinder air-to-air missiles. Vought also presented a tactical reconnaissance version of the aircraft called the V-392. Major competition came from the Grumman F-11 Tiger, the upgraded twin-engine McDonnell F-3 HDMIN, and lastly, the North American F-100 Super Sabre, hastily adapted to carrier use and dubbed the Super Fury. In May 1953, the Vought design was declared a winner, and in June, Vought received an order for 3 F-8U-1 prototypes. The first prototype flew on the 25th of March 1955 with John Conrad at the controls. The aircraft exceeded the speed of sound during its maiden flight. The development was so trouble-free that the second prototype, along with the first production F-8U, flew on the same day, the 30th of September 1955. On the 4th of April 1956, the F-8U performed its first catapult launch from Forrestal. Crusader 3. In parallel with the F-8U-1S and 2S, the Crusader design team was also working on a larger aircraft with ever greater performance, internally designated as the V401. Although the Vought F-8U Crusader 3 was externally similar to the Crusader and sharing with it such design elements as the variable incidence wing, the new fighter was significantly larger and shared few components. Operational history. Prototype F-8U-1S were evaluated by VX-3 beginning in late 1956, with few problems noted. Weapons development was conducted at Naval Air Weapons Station China Lake and a China Lake F-8U-1 set U.S. national speed record in August 1956. Commander Duke Windsor set, broke, and set a new level flight speed record of 1015.428 miles per hour on the 21st of August 1956, beating the previous record of 822 miles per hour set by a USAF F-100. However, the world's speed record of 1132 miles per hour, set by the British Ferry Delta II on the 10th of March 1956, was not broken. An early F-8U-1 was modified as a photo reconnaissance aircraft, becoming the first F-8U-1P. Subsequently, the RF-8A equipped with cameras rather than guns and missiles. On 16 July 1957, Major John H. Glenn, Jr., USMC, completed the first supersonic transcontinental flight in the F-8U-1P, flying from NAS Los Alamitos, California to Floyd Bennett Field, New York in 3 hours, 23 minutes and 8.3 seconds. First Fleet operators. VX-3 was one of the first units to receive the F-8U-1 in December 1956, and was the first to operate the type in April 1957 from the U.S. Franklin D. Roosevelt. VX-3 was the first unit to qualify for carrier operations, but several aircraft were lost in accidents, in several cases killing the pilots. The first Fleet squadron to fly the Crusader was VF-32 at NAS Cecil Field, Florida, in 1957, deploying to the Mediterranean late that year on Saratoga. VF-32 renamed the squadron the Swordsman, in keeping with the Crusader theme. The Pacific Fleet received the first Crusaders at NAS Moffett Field in Northern California, and the VF-154 Grand Slammers began their F-8 operations. Later in 1957, in San Diego, VMF-122 accepted the first Marine Corps Crusaders. In 1962, the Defense Department standardized military aircraft designations generally along Air Force lines. Consequently, the F-8U became the F-8, with the original F-8U-1 redesignated F-8A. Fleet service. The Crusader became a day fighter operating off the aircraft carriers. At the time, U.S. Navy carrier air wings had gone through a series of day and night fighter aircraft due to rapid advances in engines and avionics. Some squadrons operated aircraft for very short periods before being equipped with a newer, higher-performance aircraft. The Crusader was the first post-Korean War aircraft to have a relatively long tenure with the fleet, unlike the USAF Republic F-105 Thunderchief, a contemporary design might have stayed in service longer if not for the Vietnam War and resulting attrition from combat and operational losses. Cuban Missile Crisis. The unarmed Crusader was operated aboard carriers as a detachment from either VFP-62 or VFP-63 and Marines from VMCJ-2 to provide photo reconnaissance capability, as our F-8A proved ideal for the task of getting low-altitude detailed photographs. During the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, our F-8As flew extremely hazardous low-level photo reconnaissance missions over Cuba, with overflights beginning on the 23rd of October 1962. These were the first true operational flights of the F-8 Crusader. Flights of our F-8As operating in several pairs of aircraft, with each pair assigned a different target, left Key West twice each day, to fly over Cuba at low level, then returned to Jacksonville, where the film was offloaded and developed, to be rushed north to the Pentagon. These flights confirmed that the Soviet Union was setting up IRBMs in Cuba. The RF-8As also monitored the withdrawal of the Soviet missiles. To keep score after an overflight, each aircraft was given a stencil of a dead chicken. The overflights went on for about 6 weeks and returned a total of 160,000 images. The pilots who flew to the missions all received distinguished flying crosses, while VFP-62 and VMCJ-2 received the prestigious U.S. Navy Unit Commendation. Mishap rate. The Crusader was not an easy aircraft to fly, and was often unforgiving in carrier landings, where it suffered from yaw instability, and the poorly designed cast-ring nose undercarriage made steering on the deck problematic. Safe landings required the carriers to steam at full speed to lower the relative landing speed for Crusader pilots. The stacks of the oil-burning carriers on which the Crusader served belched thick black smoke, sometimes obscuring the flight deck, leaving the Crusader's pilot dependent on the landing signal officer's radioed instructions. It earned a reputation as an ensign killer during its early service introduction. The nozzle and air intake were so low when the aircraft was on the ground of the flight deck that the crews called the aircraft the Gator. Not surprisingly, the Crusader's mishap rate was relatively high compared to its contemporaries, the Douglas A-4 Skyhawk and the F-4 Phantom II. However, the aircraft did possess some amazing capabilities, as proved when several Crusader pilots took off with the wings folded. One of these episodes took place on the 23rd of August 1960. A Crusader with the wings folded took off from Napoli Capodichino in full afterburner, climbed to 5,000 feet and then returned to land successfully. The pilot, absent-minded but evidently a good stick man, complained that the control forces were higher than normal. The Crusader was capable of flying in this state, though the pilot would be required to reduce aircraft weight by ejecting stores and fuel prior to landing. In all, 1,261 Crusaders were built. By the time it was withdrawn from the fleet, 1,106 had been involved in mishaps. Only a handful of them were lost to enemy fire in Vietnam War. When conflict erupted in the skies over North Vietnam, it was U.S. Navy Crusaders from the USANCOG that first tangled with Vietnam People's Air Force MiG-17s. On the 3rd of April 1965, the MiGs claimed the downing of a Crusader, and LT-FAM Nock Lance gun camera revealed that his cannons had set an F-8 ablaze, but Lieutenant Commander Spence Thomas had managed to land his damaged Crusader at Da Nang, the remaining F-8s returning safely to the carrier. At the time, the Crusader was the best dogfighter the United States had against the nimble North Vietnamese MiGs. The U.S. Navy had evolved its night fighter role in the air wing to an all-weather interceptor, the F-4 Phantom II, equipped to engage incoming bombers at long range with missiles such as AIM-7 Sparrow as the sole air-to-air weapons, and maneuverability was not emphasized in the design. Some experts believed that the era of the dogfight was over, as air-to-air missiles would knock down adversaries well before they could get close enough to engage in dogfighting. As aerial combat ensued over North Vietnam from 1965 to 1968, it became apparent that the dogfight was not over, and the F-8 Crusader and a community trained to prevail in air-to-air combat was a key ingredient to success. The Crusader also became a bomb truck in war, with both ship-based U.S. Navy units and land-based U.S. Marine Corps squadrons attacking Communist forces in both North and South Vietnam. USMC Crusaders flew only in the South, while U.S. Navy Crusaders flew only from the small Essex-class carriers. Marine Crusaders also operated in close air support missions. Despite the "last gunfighter" moniker, the F-8S achieved only 4 victories with the cannon. The remainder were accomplished with AIM-9 Sidewinder missiles, partly due to the propensity of the 20mm Colt Mk-12 cannon's feeding mechanism to jam under G-loading during high-speed dogfighting maneuvers. Between June and July 1966, during 12 engagements over North Vietnam, Crusaders claimed 4 MiG-17s for 2 losses. The Crusader would claim the best kill ratio of any American type in the Vietnam War, 19-3. Of the 19 aircraft claimed during aerial combat, 16 were MiG-17s and 3 were MiG-21s. U.S. records only indicate 3 F-8s lost in aerial combat, all to MiG-17 cannon fire in 1966, but the NVAF claimed 11 F-8s were shot down by MiGs. A total of 170 F-8 Crusaders would be lost to all causes during the war. Twilight service with U.S. Navy LTV built and delivered the 1,219th U.S. Navy Crusader to VF-124 at NAS Miramar on 3 September 1964. The last active-duty Navy Crusader fighter variants were retired from VF-191 and VF-194 aboard Oriskany in 1976 after almost 2 decades of service, setting a first for a Navy fighter. The photo reconnaissance variant continued to serve in the active-duty Navy for yet another 11 years, with VFP-63 flying RF-8 gigaseconds up to 1982, and with the Naval Reserve flying their RF-8 gigaseconds in 2 squadrons at Naval Air Facility Washington, Andrews AFB, until the disestablishment of VFP-306 in 1984 and VFP-206 on 29 March 1987, when the last operational Crusader was turned over to the National Air and Space Museum. The F-8 Crusader is the only aircraft to have used the AIM-9C, which is a radar-guided variant of the Sidewinder. When the Crusader retired, these missiles were converted to the AGM-122 sidearm anti-radiation missiles used by United States attack helicopters to knock out enemy radars. NASA's several modified F-8s were used by NASA in the early 1970s, proving the viability of both digital fly-by-wire and supercritical wings. French Navy. When the French Navy's air arm, the Aéronavale, required a carrier-based fighter in the early 1960s to serve aboard the new carriers Clemenceau and Foch, the F-4 Phantom, then entering service with the United States Navy, proved to be too large from the small French ships. Following carrier trials aboard Clemenceau on 16 March 1962, by two F-32 F-8s from the American carrier Saratoga, the Crusader was chosen and 42 F-8s were ordered, the last Crusaders produced. The French Crusaders were based on the F-8E, but were modified in order to allow operations from the small French carriers, with the maximum angle of incidence of the aircraft's swing increase from 5 to 7 degrees and blown flaps fitted. The aircraft's weapon system was modified to carry two French Matra 530 radar or infrared missiles as an alternative to Sidewinders, although the ability to carry the American missile was retained. Deliveries of the new aircraft, dubbed the F-8E, started in October 1964 and continued until February 1965, with the Aéronavale's first squadron, Flotille 12F, reactivated on 1 October 1964. To replace the old Corsairs, Flotille 14F received its Crusaders on 1 March 1965. In October 1974 and June 1977, Crusaders from 14F Squadron participated in the Sapphire missions over Djibouti. On 7 May 1977, two Crusaders went separately on patrol against supposedly French Air Force F-100 Super Sabres stationed at Djibouti. The leader intercepted two fighters and engaged a dogfight, but quickly called his wingman for help as he had actually engaged two Yemeni Miko Yangurovich MiG-21s. The two French fighters switched the master armament to on, but ultimately everyone returned to the bases. This was the only combat interception by French Crusaders. The Aéronavale Crusaders flew combat missions over Lebanon in 1983, escorting Dassault Breguet Super 8 Ondard strike aircraft. In October 1984, France sent Foch for Operation Myrmidon off the coast of Libya, intended to calm Colonel Gaddafi down, with 12F Squadron. The escalation of the situation in the Persian Gulf due to the Iran-Iraq conflict triggered the deployment of Clemenceau Task Force and its air wing, including 12F Squadron. 1993 saw the beginning of the missions over ex-Yugoslavia. Crusaders were launched from both carriers cruising in the Adriatic Sea. These missions ceased in June 1999 with Operation Trident over Kosovo. The French Crusaders were subject to a series of modifications throughout the life, being fitted with new F-8J-type wings in 1969 and having modified afterburners fitted in 1979. Armament was enhanced by the addition of R-550 Magic infrared-guided missiles in 1973, with the improved all-aspect Magic II fitted from 1988. The obsolete R-530 was withdrawn from use in 1989, leaving the Crusaders without a radar-guided missile. In 1989, when it was realized that the Crusader would not be replaced for several years, it was decided to refurbish the Crusaders to extend their operating life. Each aircraft was rewired and had its hydraulic system refurbished, while the airframe was strengthened to extend fatigue life. Avionics were improved with a modified navigation suite and a new radar warning receiver. The 17 refurbished aircraft were redesignated as F-8P. Although the French Navy participated in combat operations in 1991 during Operation Desert Storm and over Kosovo in 1999, the Crusaders stayed behind and were eventually replaced by the Rafale M in 2000 as the last of the breed in military service. Philippine Air Force. In late 1977, the Philippine government government purchased 35 second-hand U.S. Navy F-8Hs that were stored at Davis Monthan AFB in Arizona. 25 of them were refurbished by Vought and the remaining 10 were used for spare parts. As part of the deal, the U.S. would train Philippine pilots in using the F-8A. They were mostly used for intercepting Soviet bombers. The F-8s were grounded in 1988 and were finally withdrawn from service in 1991 after they were badly damaged by the Mount Pinatubo eruption, and have since been offered for sale as scrap variants. F-8U-1 The two original unarmed prototypes, F-8U-1 first production version J57P12 engine replaced with more powerful J57P4A starting with 31st production aircraft, 318 built. YF-8U-1 One F-8U-1 fighter used for development testing. YF-8U-1E, one F-8U-1 converted to serve as an F-8U-1E prototype. F-8U-1E added a limited all-weather capability thanks to the APS-67 radar. The unguided rocket tray was sealed shut because it was never used operationally. First flight 3 September 1958, 130 built. XF-8U-1T, 1 XF-8U-2NE used for evaluation as a two-seat trainer. F-8U-1T, two-seat trainer version based on F-8U-2NE, fuselage stretched 2 feet, internal armament reduced to 2 cannon, J57P20 engine. First flight 6 February 1962. The Royal Navy was initially interested in the Rolls-Royce Pay-powered version of TF-8A but chose the Phantom II. Instead, only one TF-8A was built, although several retired F-8s were converted to similar two-seat trainers. YF-8U-2 to F-8U-1S used for flight testing the J57P16 turbojet engine. F-8U-2 J57P16 engine with 16,900 lbf of afterburning thrust. Ventral fins added under the rear fuselage in an attempt to rectify yaw instability. Y-shaped cheek pylons allowing two sidewinder missiles on each side of the fuselage. An APQ-83 radar retrofitted during later upgrades. First flight 20th of August 1957, 187 built. This variant was sometimes referred to as Crusader II. F-8U-2N, all-weather version, unguided rocket pack replaced with an additional fuel tank J57P20 engine with 18,000 lbf of afterburning thrust. Landing system which automatically maintained present airspeed during approach. Incorporation of an APQ-83 radar. First flight, 16 February 1960, 152 built. YF-8U-2N, one aircraft used in the development of the F-8U-2N. YF-8U-2NE, one F-8U-1 converted to serve as an F-8U-2NE prototype. F-8U-2NE, J57P20A engine and APQ-94 radar in a larger nose cone. Dorsal hump between the wings containing electronics for the AGM-12 bullpup missile. Payload increased to 5,000 pounds. Martin Baker ejection seat. An APQ-94 radar replaced an APQ-83 radar in earlier F-8D. IRSD sensor blister was added in front of the canopy. First flight, 30th of June 1961, 286 built. F-8E Air Superiority fighter version for the French Navy. Significantly increased wing lift due to greater slat and flap deflection and the addition of a boundary layer control system. Enlarged stabilators. Incorporated an APQ-104 radar, an upgraded version of an APQ-94. A total of 42 built. F-8H, upgraded F-8D with strengthened airframe and landing gear, with an APQ-84 radar. A total of 89 rebuilt. F-8J, upgraded F-8E, similar to F-8D but with wing modifications and BLC like on F-8E, wet pylons for external fuel tanks, J57P20A engine, with an APQ-124 radar. A total of 136 rebuilt. F-8K, upgraded F-8C with bullpup capability and J57P20A engines, with an APQ-125 radar. A total of 87 rebuilt. F-8L, F-8B upgraded with underwing hardpoints, with an APQ-149 radar. A total of 61 rebuilt. F-8P-17 F-8E of the aeronavale underwent a significant overhaul at the end of the 1980s to stretch the service life another 10 years. They were retired in 1999. F-8U-1D, several retired F-8A modified to controller aircraft for testing of the SSMN-8 regular cruise missile. DF-8A was also modified as drone control, which were used extensively by VC-8 and S. Roosevelt RD's PR Atlantic Fleet Missile Range. DF-8F, retired F-8A modified as controller aircraft for testing of missiles, including at the USN facility at China Lake. F-8U-1KU, retired F-8A modified into remote-controlled target drones. YF-8U-1P, prototypes used in the development of the F-8U-1P photo reconnaissance aircraft. V-392, F-8U-1P, unarmed photo reconnaissance version of F-8U-1E, 144 built. RF-8G, modernized RF-8AS, LTVV-100 revised, low-cost, development based on the earlier F-8 variants, created in 1970 to compete against the F-4E Phantom II, Lockheed CL-1200 and F-5-21 in a tender for U.S. military assistance program funding. The unsuccessful design was ultimately only a paper exercise. F-8U-3 Crusader 3, new design loosely based on the earlier F-8 variants, created to compete against the F-4 Phantom II, J75P5A engine with 29,500 lbf of afterburning thrust. First flight, the 2nd of June 1958, attained Mach 2.39 in test flights, cancelled after 5 aircraft were constructed because the Phantom II won the Navy contract. Operators: France, French Navy; Philippines, Philippine Air Force; United States, United States Navy; United States Marine Corps; NASA.